All right, let's read Rambler number 8 for Saturday, April 14th, 1750. The title of this essay is The Thoughts to be Brought Under Regulation as They Respect the Past, Present, and Future. First, there's a little Latin, which I'll skip, and here's a quote. For he that but conceives a crime in thought contracts the danger of an actual fault. By Creech. If the most active and industrious of mankind was able, at the close of life, to recollect distinctly his past moments, and distribute them in a regular account according to the manner in which they have been spent, it is scarcely to be imagined how few would be marked out to the mind by any permanent or visible effect. How small a proportion his real action would bear to his seeming possibilities of action. How many chasms he would find of wide and continued vacuity, and how many interstitial spaces unfilled, even in the most tumultuous hurries of business and the most eager vehemence of pursuit. It is said by modern philosophers that not only the great globes of matter are thinly scattered through the universe, but the hardest bodies are so porous that if all matter were compressed to perfect solidity, it might be contained in a cube of a few feet. In like manner, if all the employment of life were crowded into the time which it is really occupied, perhaps a few weeks, days, or hours would be sufficient for its accomplishment, so far as the mind was engaged in the performance. For such is the inequality of our corporal to our intellectual faculties, that we contrive in minutes what we execute in years, and the soul often stands an idle spectator of the labors of the hands and expedition of the feet. For this reason, the ancient generals often found themselves at leisure to pursue the study of philosophy in the camp, and Lucian, with historical veracity, makes Caesar relate of himself that he noted the revolutions of the stars in the midst of preparations for battle. And here's a quote, I think, from Caesar. Amid the storms of war, with curious eyes, I trace the planets and survey the skies. That the soul always exerts her peculiar powers with greater or lesser force is very probable, though the common occasions of our present condition require but a small part of that incessant cognition, and by the natural frame of our bodies and general combination of the world, we are so frequently condemned to inactivity that as though all our time we are thinking, so for a great part of our time, we can only think. Lest a power so restless should be either unprofitable or hurtfully employed, and the superfluities of intellect run to waste, it is no vain speculation to consider how we may govern our thoughts, restrain them from irregular motions, or confine them from boundless dissipation. How the understanding is best conducted to the knowledge of science, by what steps it is to be led forward in its pursuit, how it is to be cured of its defects and habituated to new studies, has been the inquiry of many acute and learned men, whose observations I shall not either adopt or censure. My purpose being to consider the moral discipline of the mind, and to promote the increase of virtue rather than of learning. This inquiry seems to have been neglected for want of remembering that all action has its origin in the mind, and that therefore to suffer the thoughts to be vitiated is to poison the fountains of morality. Irregular desires will produce licentious practices. What men allow themselves to wish, they will soon believe, and will be at last incited to execute what they please themselves with contriving. For this reason, the casuists of the Roman Church, who gain by confession great opportunities of knowing human nature, have generally determined that what is a crime to do, it is a crime to think. And there's a citation here. This was determined before their time. See Maddock, volume 28. Since by revolving with pleasure the faculty, safety, or advantage of a wicked deed, a man soon begins to find his constancy relaxed and his detestation soften. The happiness of success glittering before him withdraws his attention from the atrociousness of the guilt, and acts are at last confidently perpetrated, of which the first conception only crept into the mind disguised in pleasing complications and permitted rather than invited. No man has ever been drawn but to crimes by love or jealousy, envy or hatred, but he can tell how easily he might at first have repelled the temptations, how readily his mind would have obeyed a call to any other object, and how weak his passions have been after some causal avocation, till he has recalled it again to his heart, and revised the viper by too warm a fondness. Such, therefore, is the importance of keeping reason a constant guard over imagination, that we have otherwise no security for our own virtue, but may corrupt our hearts in the most recluse solitude, with more pernicious and tyrannical appetites and wishes than the commerce of the world will generally produce. For we are easily shocked by crimes which appear at once in their full magnitude, but the gradual growth of our own wickedness, endeared by interest and palliated by all the artifices of self-deceit, gives us time to form distinctions in our own favor, and reason by degrees submits to absurdities, as the eye is in time accommodated to darkness. In this disease of the soul, it is of the utmost importance to apply remedies at the beginning, and therefore I shall endeavor to show what thoughts are to be rejected or improved, as they regard the past, present, or future, in hopes that some may be awakened to caution and vigilance, who perhaps indulge themselves in dangerous dreams. So much the more dangerous, because, being yet only dreams, they are concluded innocent. The recollection of the past is only useful by way of provision for the future, and therefore in reviewing all occurrences that fall under a religious consideration. It is proper that a man stop at the first thoughts to remark how he was led thither, and why he continues the reflection. If he is dwelling with delight upon a stratagem of successful fraud, a night of licentious riot, or an intrigue of guilty pleasure, let him summon off his imagination as from an unlawful pursuit. Expel those passages from his remembrance, of which, though he cannot seriously approve them, the pleasure overpowers the guilt, and refer them to a future hour, when they may be considered with greater safety. Such an hour will certainly come, for the impressions of past pleasure are always lessening, but the sense of guilt which respects futurity continues the same. The serious and impartial retrospect of our conduct is indisputably necessary to the confirmation or recovery of virtue, as is therefore recommended under the name of self-examination by divines as the first act previous to repentance. It is indeed of so great use that without it we should always be to begin life, be seduced forever by the same allurements, and misled by the same fallacies. But in ordering that we may not lose the advantage of our experience, we must endeavor to see everything in its proper form, and excite in ourselves those sentiments which the great author of nature has decreed the concomitants or followers of good or bad actions. And here's a long passage in Greek with I think a translation here. Let's read it. Let not sleep, says Pythagoras, fall upon thy eyes till thou thrice reviewed the transactions of the past day. Where have I turned aside from rectitude? What have I been doing? What have I left undone, which I thought I had done? Begin thus from the first act, and proceed, and in conclusion, and the ill which thou hast done be troubled and rejoice for the good. Our thoughts on present things, being determined by the objects before us, fall not under those indulgences or excursions which I am now considering. But I cannot forbear under this head to caution pious and tender minds that are disturbed by the irruptions of wicked imaginations against too great dejection and too anxious alarms. For thoughts are only criminal when they are first chosen, and then voluntarily continued. Here's another quote. Evil into the mind of God or man may come and go, so unapproved, and leave no spot or stain behind. Milton. In futurity chiefly are the snares lodged, by which the imagination is entangled. Futurity is the proper abode of hope and fear, with all their train and progeny of subordinate apprehensions and desires. In futurity, events and chances are yet floating at large, without apparent connection with their causes, and we therefore easily indulge the liberty of gratifying ourselves with a pleasing choice. To pick and cull among possible advantages is, as the civil law terms it, in vacuum venire, to take what belongs to nobody. But it has this hazard in it, that we shall be unwilling to quit what we have seized, though an owner should be found. It is easy to think on that which may be gained, till at last we resolve to gain it, and to image the happiness of particular conditions, till we can be easy in no other. We ought, at least, to let our desires fix upon nothing in another's power for the sake of our quiet, or in another's possession for the sake of our innocence. When the man finds himself led, though by the train of honest sentiments, to wish for that to which he has no right, he should start back as from a pitfall covered with flowers. He that fancies he should benefit from public more in a great station than a man that fills it, will in time imagine it an act of virtue to supplant him, and as opposition readily kindles into hatred, his eagerness to do that good to which he is not called, will betray him to crimes which in his original scheme were never proposed. He therefore that would govern his actions by the laws of virtue must regulate his thoughts by those of reason. He must keep guilt from the recesses of his heart, and remember that the pleasures of fancy and the emotions of desire are more dangerous as they are more hidden, since they escape the awe of observation and operate equally in every situation without the concurrence of external opportunities. What a fascinating observation and warning and admonition from Dr. Johnson about how to manage our thoughts utilizing reason, particularly to guard ourselves against the actions that we might find ourselves taking today to avail ourselves with a future circumstance that might be virtuous, evil actions performed today to get us to a virtuous end that we seem to pursue. He says right here, I wonder if I can find it again. He therefore that would govern his actions by the laws of virtue must regulate his thoughts by those of reason. I'm going to pencil mark here. He therefore that would govern his actions by the laws of virtue must regulate his thoughts by those of reason. Jeez Louise, that's powerful. Okay, I'm going to have to quote that one out, pull that one out to save. Thanks for joining me.